To use the nudge, I'll just select the point or the item, and I can use my arrow keys, and I can move that selection around in 1 millimeter increments. Well, this is where I set that distance. It defaults to 1. If that's what you want, that's great. If you want something else, that's great. That's fine too. Another thing is sometimes we have a hard time seeing the screen as far as the lines, because they're very thin and they're very precise. Well, you can thicken up your lines. So as you're digitizing, if you're having a hard time seeing that line, you can actually go into the screen drawing right here and increase the vector thickness from 1 to 4, 4 being the highest. Okay? Everything else pretty much preset. Auto recovery settings, I recommend going in here, enabling your autosave. Now what I've got on my screen right now is I've got autosave turned on, which basically means that every 5 minutes it's going to save every design that I have open. Okay? Now, in order for autosave to work, you have to save your design one time. After you've saved it once, the autosave feature will kick in after that. But you have to save it one time first. Same with a backup copy. Ethos is going to make a backup of every design that you save, but not until you've saved it one time. Okay? So you can go in here to auto recover settings and turn on these features. Now you can set your time to any of these increments. You can set it to just be the design you're working on or all the designs that you have open. That's just a personal preference, totally up to you. On-off settings. Most of this stuff is set the way you want. You don't have to go in here and change things, but there's a few that I want you to be familiar with. For example, if you have a lot of issues with your system locking up or throwing you out, come in here and turn on action logging. To turn it on, you double left click on it, and that changes the value. Okay? Now what that does is it might not stop you crashing, but it records every step that you do so that we can go back and it saves it into a file. So we can go back and look at that file and find out at what point your system is locking up or freezing up. So it's more of a excuse me, I'm sorry. It's more of a troubleshooting tool for for support than anything else. You'll notice when we start a new design that I have a black box around my design. Well, that is draw page frame. That's that feature. Some people like that, like to have that. It's a 100 by 100 millimeter box, so roughly 4-inch by 4-inch box. Some of the other things in here, I usually work with a gray screen when I digitize or when I create lettering. I don't want to print that gray screen, so I turn off show background color when printing. Okay, otherwise when I print a run sheet, I'm going to have a nice big gray box behind my design. The last thing in here that I recommend changing is right above there. It says Save DST Color Information. You might have noticed that when you write or export a DST file, it actually exports out 3 files. One is the DST, well that's what we want, but the other 2 are just color information files. Okay? And a lot of times it can be kind of confusing having all those extra files, and they're really, unless you just want those, there's really no other need for it unless you use them or need them. So in order to get rid of that confusion or clear it up, you can turn that feature off. Okay? And again, these stay off or stay on unless you go back in here and make modifications. All right? Apply. Okay. And we're ready to go. Now, our database. A couple of ways to get into your database or your browser. Design browser, Control B, or this icon right here that looks like a little envelope. Open it up, and here's your database. Now, if I click on the word, this is my tree right here, okay? If I click on the word database, it's going to tell me that I'm looking at 483 designs, and it's going to give me a preview. I've got it set to alphabetical order. I've got it set to show me thumbnails, okay? I can search by using this icon. I can click on an icon and delete it if I want to. I can see the history or the properties of that design. Now, one of the nice things about the database is the fact that I can set up categories and customers. So I can quickly click on a customer and see all the designs that I've done for that customer. I could even use this icon right here that's grayed out right now to do a printout for my customer. Customer comes in, wants a printout of all his designs. Well, I can come in here and grab this one, hold down my Shift key and grab the last one. Now it's grabbed all the ones in between. Choose Create Web Catalog. Give it a name. We'll call it Training. And I'm going to actually launch the catalog. I turn this on. Say OK. Now what it's going to do is it's going to create a file that I can actually print. Now you should see that file. This is a file, the HTML file I just made. Here's my design, my name, my size, my stitch count. I can now print this out, email this, do whatever I want to my customer. Okay, so it's just an easy way to go in and make a file that you can use, for your customer, or print out something. Maybe you want to set that up as a category and call it, standard font styles. When you've got over 200 fonts here in Ethos, and we're going to get into using those here in just a few minutes, but customer comes in and wants their name on a bag or name on a shirt or whatever, you're not going to show them all 200 fonts, because if you do, you're going to be sitting there for forever letting them pick out a font. So what you do is you pick out a dozen or 10 or 6 or whatever it is that you like. You do a script, you do a block, you do a serif, things like that. Make yourself a printout, and that way when a customer comes in and says, "Oh, I want my name on a bag," you say, "Here, pick one of these 6 fonts or these 8 fonts." Because if you tell them you've got 206 or 200 and whatever you have, they're going to want to go through all 200 of those fonts and try to figure out which one to use. And you don't want to waste all that time for a $5, $8, $10 bag that you're just putting, or whatever, that you're just putting a name on. All right. So there's a lot of ways that you can use the web catalog. Other things too is you can double click, and when you're ready to access the design, you can actually just double click on that design, and it will open it up so that you can go in, digitize it, make modifications to it, whatever you want to do. This particular design has not been digitized. It was just set up as artwork, and it was ready to digitize. So, there's always a way that you can go to your database, look at your designs, and find a design that you've already got, bring it in, make modifications, do whatever you want to do to it. Okay? All right. So moving along, actually I'm going to close my browser, and I'm going to close my Tiger Paw. Now, we're ready to go in and start a brand new design. The real simple, easy way to start a brand new design is to use this down arrow. This is to start a new one. If I'm doing lettering, if I'm going to digitize, whatever I'm going to do, this is how I do it. I start with this new embroidery design. Now, if, however, I'm not starting with a new design, let's say that I have a DST file that maybe I purchased, maybe I had somebody digitize it for me, I've got it on stock design, whatever, or I've got my BE100 files that I had, previously. Well, under the design menu, this is how you would bring in one of those type of files. For example, DST, that's probably the most common. That's the one that you downloaded, that you bought from when you got your machine, you got a stock design CD. That's the one if you contracted out something to be digitized, more than likely they sent you back a DST file. To bring in that DST file, you're going to go to Design, you're going to go to Import, and you're going to choose Alien DOS. Okay? When you do that, it remembers the last place you brought in a DST file from. On my computer sitting here, it just so happened I brought one in off my A drive. This time I don't have anything in the A drive. I'm going to click on Cancel. Now it brings up a regular file open box. If it does not say Tajima in right here, choose your down arrow, go down, find Tajima, click on it, not this one, the first one, okay? Now, at this point, once you start opening Tajima files, the software does two things. It remembers the location of where you open it from. That's why mine came up to the A drive. It also remembers the type of file that you open. Okay? So it's going to stay on this. You don't have to change it at one time. Here's some designs that we have. I'm going to double left click on the design. It wants to know where I want to open it. Well, for you guys, I think everybody in this class, you're going to have Artisan Plus, and you'll have this default box right here. You will just double left click, and it will import in this design. All right? Now, with this design, you've got a few things, okay? First off, at the bottom of the screen, it tells you your size. Now, I'm working in millimeters. You can work in inches. If you prefer to work in inches, View, Options, Display Inches will switch you to inches. Now, just a side note to that, once you switch, it'll stay in inches until you switch again, okay? So even if you exit the software, come back in, it's still going to be in inch mode. When you switch to inches, in my opinion, it's a good idea to go ahead and, once I switch to inches, exit my software and come back in. That will reset pretty much everything in the system to inch mode versus millimeter mode. Everything's not going to change. There are a few things that will still remain in millimeters. For example, your density or your pitch of your stitches, that's always going to be in millimeters, okay? When you're working with small lettering, I personally find it easier to work in millimeter mode because I can get very fine, very precise movements. But that's just me. You might feel totally comfortable in inches and never need to switch back. But those are some things, to think about when you're switching from your different ones. Okay, so we're in millimeters, 125 by 77. Basically, that means that this design is 5 inches by 3 inches. The easiest way that I know that so quickly is because 1 inch equals 25.4 millimeters, or 25 millimeters. So I can very quickly look and say, well, if it's 25 and 125 there, that means that we're 5 inches wide. 77 means that we're 3 inches tall. Very simple. Okay? Another thing that it tells us is it tells us how many stitches this design has. It has 12,065 stitches in it. So, that's the straight information that it gives me very quickly. As I select items in the design, for example, ATL right here in the left, it will tell me that this section, which is called a stitch block, is 152 stitches, and it's 7.7 by 4.1. So when I select on an item, for example, the beak there, we're 193 stitches. We're 13 millimeters by 10 millimeters. Okay? So each section, it'll tell me what that is. Now, one of the things that I'll do sometimes is I'll go through this design step by step and watch how it stitches out. The way I do that is under my Tools menu. I have this feature here. The feature is called Show Blocks. Okay? Don't get it confused with the one above it, which is Show Punch Objects. The difference, Show Punch Objects, that's for designs or sections that you created when you digitized this design. Okay? A design that you digitized and saved, and you want to go through section by section, you can use this Show Punch Objects. This design, I didn't digitize it. It was emailed to me to look at, so I don't have the punch objects. I just have the stitch blocks. All right? I'm going to click on that, and I get this little player up here. A few key things to this player. This button here and this button here. All right? Well, first off, I'm going to click on Clear. I'm not going to click on Delete. Delete is what it says it is. It will, if you select a section and hit Delete, it will delete it. All right? This takes me to my very first block. Well, there it is, the head of that eagle. As I go to this third icon, it shows me every block after that, one at a time. All right? And then I can say all, just to make sure I've got everything. Now, that showed me block by block, and it left the stitches on. There's another way you can do it. If you say, back to the first block, clear, if you turn this button off, it will show you, block by, easier said than done, block by block, and it will hide the one before it. There it is, section by section, and it's hiding the sections around it as you go through. Then all, and OK. All right, so that's the one of the ways that you can go through and see your design section by section. The other way is, of course, going to your View menu and going down to Snapshot. Snapshot also shows you section by section. It tells you how many stitches there are in each one of those sections by giving you the number right here. If there's a trim, it puts a T on it. Okay, so you can see whether or not it has a trim. Now, if you need to select a section, click on this little box, and it'll select it. Now this is how I can also adjust my sewing sequence. If I take this number 3, click and drag, it will let me change my sequence. I have to refresh in order to see that change take place, okay? This right here, this icon, the 2 little blue arrows, this is your screen refresh. Notice that now my green detail is now behind my eagle head. It is now the very first thing in this design that stitches out. I can also see it by needle color. This is my design by color. If I want to grab everything of one color, I can just select it down here. Okay? Now, I have a third option here, but it doesn't apply to a stitch file. This is view effect. Well, I didn't stitch this. I didn't digitize this design, so I don't know what the effect types are. So, it's not going to show me that. Had I digitized it, if I clicked on this third button, it would show me that I'm using a fill stitch, a satin stitch, a running stitch, all of those different types of stitches. It will list out through here, showing me what they are up above it. All right. I can then come over here, turn off my snapshot. But I do have one little option here. It's called auto hide. Auto hide means while you're not using it, it'll go away. But look in the lower left corner of your screen, you see the little tab for snapshot. If I come here, there it is back up. If I go out of it, it goes down. So if I'm pretty comfortable using snapshot and I use it quite a bit, then it's a good idea to turn on that auto hide, and that way you're not constantly opening and closing the snapshot tool. If you do decide to close it, this X or view snapshot will close it. Okay? So either way, you can close it out. Alright, now, this is a stitch file. So far we've not done anything to it. Let's say that we've got this file and we need to make it larger or smaller. Okay? What we don't want to do in making this file larger or smaller is, I don't want to grab a corner and click and drag. Yes, it made it smaller, but look what it did to my stitch count. It did nothing to my stitch count. If I had digitized this and I have the outlines, then yes, I could click and drag and make it bigger, smaller, whatever. But since I don't, I cannot do it that way, and I don't want to try. What I want to do is I want to use an icon. It's going to be on your left-hand toolbar, almost to the bottom, and it says Stitch Graduator. It's blue stitches with a little magic wand beside it. Emphasis on this point. The only time we use Stitch Graduator is with a expanded stitch file. Again, if I've digitized this design, or if it's lettering that I've created in this design, I do not use this tool. This is only for expanded stitch files. Okay? Alright, Stitch Graduator. Very powerful tool. First part of Stitch Graduator shows me the details. The design name, size, the width, the height, the stitch count. Okay? I don't make any changes up here. That's just information. Where the magic happens is transformation settings and below. All of those are settings that I can adjust. Now, here's a good rule of thumb. When taking a DST file and making it larger or smaller, a good, safe size to adjust it to is up or down 20%. I can take this design and make it 20% larger or smaller with relative confidence that it's going to sew out fine. You can make it, it'll let you do whatever percentage you want. But my limitation comes in, what's going to happen to these really narrow satins in the letters MC right here and ATL beside it if I make this 50% smaller? They're going to become too small to be an effective satin. Okay? What's going to happen if I go in and make this 300% larger to these satin stitches? They're going to be too wide to be an effective satin. Okay? So while a design, there's not a 100% set in stone number that you can change, in all my years I can pretty much say that just about every design could work at 20% bigger or smaller. Okay? But beyond that, before I make it change, I better feel confident that my satins aren't getting too wide or that my satins aren't getting too narrow. Okay? That's what we have to look at. Now, the nice thing is I can type in my width and it will adjust my height proportionally. If I want to do it out of proportion, then I just type in the height and it will leave the width at 100% or whatever percent I want. Of course, I could rotate the design down here if I wanted to. It automatically adjusts these settings down here. It adjusts the density of the fill stitch. It adjusts the stitch length. See that stitch length right there, 3.5? One thing to keep in the back of your head is if you've got a fill area, then if you adjust this down 20%, or let's say you adjust it down a very small increment, maybe 5% or something like that, if whoever created that fill didn't use 3.5, let's say they used 4.0, you're going to have more stitches even though you've gone down. There's been several times where a customer's called in, they said, oh, I've got this design, I made it 5% smaller and my stitch count went up. How'd that happen? Well, whoever created the design originally used a longer stitch length than 3.5. So when you shrunk it down, it shortened those stitch lengths up, which added more stitches. Just something to kind of keep in the back of your head. How long is my stitch length in my fill area? In just a couple of minutes, once we get past this, I'll show you real quick how to check that. Anyway, it adjusts the density and the width of your satin stitches. Okay? It's going to make those changes. You don't want it to make those changes? Put this back to 100. Okay? It won't do it. Alright? Word of caution. You go in and use Stitch Graduator 20%, and then you're like, no, I don't like that. Let me go back down and go back into Stitch Graduator, and let's go down 10%. the more you start to manipulate this, the more times you do, the more you're going to start to get little inconsistencies in your stitches. Okay? My best recommendation is figure out before you do anything in Stitch Graduator, okay, exactly what do I want to do? Oops, wrong button. Do I want to go up, down? What do I want to do? Adjust it one time and then be ready to go. Because if you adjust it 5 or 6 times, the more you adjust, see, this is not bad right here. These two little inconsistencies, probably wouldn't ever notice it. But the more I continue to modify this, the more these inconsistencies are going to grow. Okay? So it's not one of those tools where you continuously boom, 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 change it 5 times. Figure out beforehand, okay, where do I want to be? 20%, 10%, 30%, whatever. Before I say okay, it'll tell me my size. If I come in and I say, okay, I'm going to increase this 20%, look, it already tells me my size right there. Before I even say okay, it also tells me my stitch count, what it's going to be. So other than visually seeing it on the screen, I've got all the other information there. I can say, oh, that's too many stitches, or that's too big, or whatever. Let's go ahead and do 115, you know? And that way I haven't clicked OK, and I'm not getting into starting to, mess with my design. Goes for density too, yes. Everything about it is going to, you are processing raw stitch data. And the more you process that, the more the integrity you're going to lose. Okay? So this is a fantastic tool. I recommend it. I use it myself all the time. But I don't change it 5 times. Okay? I figure out what I'm going to do. I use it, and then I go from there. Okay? Now, one other part to this that's grayed out right here is only graduate selected blocks. What that means, I've got my design. I click on this red area, which happens to be a fill stitch. Okay? I go into my stitch graduator. Now, only graduate selected blocks is turned on. That's because I have a section in my design selected. Whatever changes I make, it's only going to affect this red section. Okay? Expanded stitch files are your DST files. When I say expanded stitch file, I mean a DST. Okay? Alright, now, maybe on this section right here of red, I don't care about changing the size. Size is okay. I care about changing my density. Well, 50%. Okay? Now look at the density of the red area. See how open it is? All right? That's because I only changed the density. Same thing. Let's say that I wanted to go in here and change the width of ATL. I wanted to make it thicker. Only selected blocks. That means it's only going to affect ATL, satin stitch, width. Now I would never do this, but I'm going to go 20% on this one. See how fat that is? Okay? So I don't have to necessarily change the size I can just go in and adjust my stitch settings. Alright? That's your stitch graduator. Now, if you were done, you did that, you did the graduator, you made it bigger, smaller, adjusted whatever you wanted to adjust. Now I'm done. I'm ready to go. I would save it. Okay? I always want to save it as a new design in my database. Here's where I can give it my name. Maybe this is I put a 1 on the end of it, or something else to know that it's been modified, you know, whatever. Maybe I come in here and put in my description that on you know, August 17th I made a change. Go ahead and save it. Then I'm ready to output it to my disk or my floppy drive or my memory stick or directly to my machine if I'm using a PR machine. You know, whichever way, I want to go export DST. Now, again, just like importing, it remembers. Well, it remembers that where I want to export it to. Yeah, you can, but again, you're still, I mean, you're dealing with, you know, once I save it in the system, sure, I can open it back up and change it some more, but that's not going to change the fact that, you know, I've got a little bit of distortion going on right now. You know, the more times I graduate it, the more I'm going to get, you know, more distortion. Just because I saved it didn't mean that I got rid of the little bit of distortion that I had. Okay, because you're always going to have slight, you know, some distortion in there. But yes, you can. You can save it, and you don't have to on a stitch design like this. You really don't need to finalize it unless you add things to it. If you copy and pasted stuff like that, because you know, realistically, this is a stitch design, so you're not changing. It's not changing the stitch effect because it's just stitches, and so you don't necessarily have to go through finalized design if you don't want to. But if you've moved it around, or you know, you might want that origin to change. Okay, so that's where finalized design would help you. Yeah, it's still a DST file, but Ethos is going to name it an ISI. Okay, because that's the file that Ethos saves in ISI. But just because it's an ISI, at the end of the day, it's still only raw stitches as opposed to an outline. Same thing with BE100 or any program. If you used BE100 before and you brought in a DST file and you made changes and you saved it, it saved it as a BDF file. That didn't mean that that BDF file had outlines. Okay, so same thing applies here. Now, back on the save, wherever we're saving it to, if we use a PR machine and we're plugged in via USB cable, it will be probably our G drive. Okay, we could do memory stick. I use an external floppy network, wherever, but it remembers. It remembers that if I save it to my A drive, next time I go to export it as a DST, it's going to go to my A drive. Okay, so it remembers where we're writing it to. All right. Now, what are some other things that we can do to this design? Well, let's look at something here. I'm going to zoom in on the word rare. Notice that every letter is joined together. Very common. You get a design digitized, they send it back with lettering. Unless you specified that you wanted to trim between those letters, probably they're going to be joined like this. Okay? Well, what if I want them to be separate? I want them to I want to change the color of the R. I want to put a trim in between each one. Whatever the reason, I want them to be separated. Well, click on it. Go to Stitches, Block, Split and Lock. Okay? Split and Lock gives me a little knife blade. Now, left click over where I want to cut. Okay? So here I'm cutting between the letters. Left click, left click, left click, left click. Now I've done all four. I'm good with that. I'm happy. I'm going to hit my right mouse button to perform the cut. Now, you should all see dashed lines between here. This tool, split and lock. That means it's automatically going to put a trim in for you after it cuts. Instead of a solid line like we saw before, see our dashed line? So, between the B and the R, select it, Stitches, Block, Split and Lock, left click, right click to perform the cut. Now you've got a dashed line. All right? All right, other things that we can do besides that. We can move individual stitches. The way we're viewing these letters is called Quick Render View. I use that view primarily all the time when I'm digitizing. But if I need to edit individual stitches, I'm going to switch my view to normal. Control Q is your hotkey. Views, Options. See Quick Render View, turned off, nothing checked there. Control Q, I can turn it back on. Just as a side note, my jumps are on. That's why I can see those dashed lines. Control J, my jumps are off. I want to print this out and give it to a customer as a nice printout. I'll probably go into full render view, leave my cuts off like I did, and full render view. And there's my 3D view that I can email or print or whatever and give to a customer. This is my image that will, represents thread, things like that. Typically, I don't work in this view. There's Quick Render, there's Normal. And the reason I told you all that is because if I need to go in here and move a stitch, it's easier to move it this way than it is this way. They're harder to see. Select it. This icon is my stitch editor. Again, this tool, like a lot of most other stuff we've been talking about so far today, we only use this tool, or typically we only use this tool on designs we didn't create. Yes, I can move a stitch on a design that I digitized, but that's for a different class. Okay? Select Stitches. There are my needle penetrations on this B. I want to modify. Okay. Let me fix you. I'll move you over. Move you over. Move you back. Whatever I want to do. What if I want to delete some stitches. Hit delete on my keyboard. Select the stitch or the group of stitches you want to get rid of. Press the delete key. You realize you've done one step too far. Undo. You've got a real kind of tight area and it's hard to get your, hard to draw a box. Use this option here. It's under Tools. It's the fourth one down. It's called Select Region. Left click and drag. And there's your region. Okay? Now, besides deleting points, I can insert points. Pick a point, insert on my keyboard, and there I've inserted a point. I can insert as many points as I want. Another thing that I can do is I can pick any one of these points, press the home key. This will take me to the very first stitch in this section. Now, once I get there, if I choose my right arrow key on my keyboard, it's going to walk me through stitch by stitch, or needle penetration by needle penetration. Well, why would you want to go to the very first stitch in your section? Well, I had a lady come in the other day, said, sending my design off to this company wherever. She said, every time I get my design back, when it starts to sew, I get a thread pull out. Every time. She said, I think there's something wrong with my machine. I said, nope. I said, it doesn't have what's called a fixing stitch. The fixing stitch is the stitch that the software puts in before it takes off and starts sewing your design. If we look at this B, even though we've deleted a bunch of stitches out of here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it starts going around doing my underlay. Typically what you'll find, at least in designs you've created in Ethos and designs that are created in, in packages, other packages, when it starts to stitch, it puts in needle penetrations about 4 or 5 in a row, so that when you listen to your machine and it takes off, it starts sewing, it goes stitch, 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 and then it starts sewing at 800 or 1,000 stitches per minute or whatever you set it at. But it doesn't just immediately jump to that 1,000 stitches, okay? It sews about 3 to 5 stitches in a row, nice and slow, and then takes off, okay? You want that in your design. So you ever get a design that every time you get to a certain spot, you get a thread pull out? There's no fixing stitch. Okay, well, let's say there were none of these in here. I'm going to delete these out. I'm going to go back to my first stitch. I'm going to use my right. Now, let's say it didn't have it. See, it jumped way up here, and I started getting those thread pull-outs. Well, I can go, at this point, I can go to point. I'm sorry, I can go to stitches, stitch, and insert. And I just put in 1, 2, 3 stitches, 4 stitches. Nice and short, really close together. That's going to be enough to keep that from pulling out when it starts up. Okay, does that make sense? Now, let's go to the opposite end. What about the end of my B? Pick any stitch, press the end key on your keyboard. It takes you to the last stitch in that area. Right click will back you up. You can check and see if you've got a locking stitch. Same problem you have with a fixing stitch, you can have with a locking stitch. The 3 to 5 stitches is not necessary if they're not separated. If they're separated, yes. If they're not separated, it's not so necessary, because again, your machines, if they're not separated, it's not picking up, it's continuously stitching on. Okay, so if it's separated, yes. If it's not separated, then if it just shows, B, R, E, E, without stopping, then you probably don't need it. Okay, it's just when the machine picks up and stops. If it changes colors, if it has a trim, things like that. Yes. Now, when you're on your last stitch, you use when you're on your first stitch and you go to home, you use the right arrow. When you're on your last stitch and you want to back up, you use the left arrow. See, here I am, right here. Now, I've been using my left arrow to back up. Now, so I'm there. Now I'm going to use my right arrow to go forward again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, there's my locking stitch right there. Okay? See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my locking stitch. It comes down, goes back, and comes down. That means it's going to tie it off, and that's all I need to have a locking stitch. If it didn't have a locking stitch, then it would come unfrayed. I mean, it would come unsewn. It would fray when it finished stitching out. Okay? You can add locking stitches just like you inserted fixing stitches. You're on your last stitch, stitch, add, down, just something like that. Well, it's kind of definitely hard to see there. Back and forth a couple of times is going to provide you with enough of a locking stitch, all right? Doesn't have to be elaborate. Don't make it more complicated than it is. You just want to go down and back, a couple of short stitches, maybe in like a V shape, something like that, just to give it a good tie-off so that it doesn't come unraveled. Again, you're not wrapping a knot or anything like that. You're just overlapping a couple of stitches so that it ties it off. Okay? All right, so while we don't have outlines to manipulate in this file, there are still tons of things that we can do to manipulate this file if we need to. Okay? Does anybody have any questions on stitch editing? All right. Well, let's continue on, and we're going to jump on into the lettering aspect of it. Now, I'm going to come back to Rare Breed here in just a second, okay? So we're not going to close this design out right now. We're going to come back to it. The question was, easier to work with a stitch or PDF? It depends on the BDF. If the BDF was a stitch file, then it's going to be the same. If I digitized it in BU100, then yes, I want the BDF because that's the outline file. Okay? But if I didn't digitize it, I just brought in a DST file and saved it in BU100, well, that's going to be no different than bringing in a DST file. They're going to be exactly the same. Okay? All right, so we're going to come back to rare breed, but we're going to start a new design, and we're going to, we're going to jump on into lettering, okay? Basic keyboard lettering. Here's my blank design. Oh, I promised you earlier I would talk about that draw page frame. See this black box that I've got right here? That's my draw page frame. I turn it on. Very easily I know what 100 by 100 or 4 inches by 4 inches. I can look. Typically, try not to get off track too much. Typically, when I'm doing a left chest logo, I want to stay within this 4-inch mark. Realistically for me, I want to stay within the 3-inch mark, but this is kind of about as close as I can, I want to get to it on my side. All right. Now, first thing I want to do, T for text. When I do that, this toolbar becomes active. Almost everything on this toolbar can relate to text. First thing is, what type of stitch effect am I working with? 90% of the time when I'm doing keyboard lettering, I'm working with a satin stitch. The rest of the time, if I know going in that this is going to be a really large design, it's a towel, it's a jacket back, it's big initials on a bag, whatever it is, I can change it to the second option. Okay? Now, don't get too caught up in this. I can always change it again later. If I forget, it's not the end of the world. I can change it later on. If I know going in, this is really small, and when I say really small, I mean 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. To me, that's really small for lettering. If I know that it's going to be that, it's going to be fall in that range, I'll go ahead and use my small satin option. Really big, really small, regular. The only one that I don't typically use in lettering is zigzag fix. Zigzag fix is primarily for applique. That is your zigzag that will hold that applique in place. Okay? All right. So we're on satin. Next thing I got to know, well, which font am I going to use? Here's my font list. In alphabetical order, except the last 5 that I used are here at the top. That top section will consistently change. As you change to a different font, that list is going to change. You will notice on my system, some of the characters have a little S beside them, some of the fonts. That is a feature in the software called small text. What that feature does, if you use, let's say, Alaska, and your lettering gets below 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters, it's going to kick, the small text option is going to kick in. Now, what that's going to do, automatically change this for you. It's going to change it to small text. It is also going to go into the inside of your letters, like the inside of this A, well, the inside of all 3 of these A's, or the inside of lowercase e's, anything that has an inner part, and open up that inner part so that it doesn't close up on you. Okay? That's what that little S means, out there beside the letter. Now, I'm going to pick a font style. I'm going to pick a size. Once I pick my font style and my size, I can left click on the screen anywhere. Does not matter. Now, notice that I'm using center justification. When you're just doing straight text, center justification doesn't come into play too much. As we get into some of these art texts, some of these others, I'll show you left, center, and right justification. But for now, we're on the screen. We're using compact and bold at 3/8 of an inch, or 10 millimeters. I'm going to type in my lettering. All right. Now, I'm reading the question here. I'll bear with me 1 second. Sometimes it must be right in a different size. Other times it should. Well, what happens is, if it's not a default size, it'll default to 0. It'll default back to 0. Hey, you guys still there? Can you still hear me okay? Uh-oh. Hey, can you hear me now? Is it better? Does it come back? Okay. All right. Very good. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Now we've got it typed in. Okay. We decided that we're not crazy about the font style. Double click. We're still in text mode. Okay. The reason I know that is because look at my select arrow, has a little I bar beside it. That just means that I'm in text mode. Double left click inside my font. As I go down my list, it's going to show me each character in that font style. Now, if I see something that looks like this, that means that the font style that you've chosen doesn't have the character that you typed in. Copperplate is a beautiful font. Love the way it stitches out. Big fan. Doesn't have lowercase characters in it. That's why I see these bars instead of my letters. Now they retain the properties. It knows, the system knows that this bar is really a P. And if I go up here and pick a font that actually has a P, it's going to show me. So I might choose Alaska. Alaska is very similar to Copperplate. Chances are, unless you're a really, really good font expert, you're not going to know that this P didn't belong with this A. Okay? Another option that I have, if I need to make something lowercase, and I don't have a lowercase character in Copperplate, well, I can make it uppercase and adjust my size on just those characters. So I could come over here, make them all uppercase, and then highlight just those. And there's my lowercase. You see that quite a bit with some fonts. Cambridge is a Great sport block font. I like it. Use it a lot. It's the lowercase of Cambridge is just the uppercase smaller. That's all it is. So don't get freaked out if you're using an asterisk, and the font that you want to use doesn't have an asterisk. Okay, well then let's go down here and find one that does, that matches, whatever it is. Okay? Now, you're never locked into this. I could come in here and save this file, come back into it next year, turn my stitches off, T for text, highlight it, make whatever changes I want to it. Okay? Even if I finalize design, no matter what, as long as I've saved the ISI file, not the DST, the ISI, then I can manipulate this for as long as I have the file. All right? All right. It is 2:41. Let's take about a 5-minute break. Don't log off, hang up, go anywhere. Take a quick little break, come back, and we'll continue on for the rest of the day, okay? If you have any questions too, it's a good little stopping point, type them in real quick, and we'll hit them as soon as we come back from break, okay? Okay, so we're going to pick back up here. Let's see, looks like we got a couple of questions. I'm Richard, by the way. Fernando is my screen login name, but I'm Richard. Let's see, hold on. Okay. All right. Yeah, still working on getting last week's class posted. Hopefully we'll get this one and that one posted at the same time at the sewingmachine.com site. Now, all right, so we're in lettering. We're going to continue on there. We just got through talking about using T for text, picking a font, picking our size. This is our offset. Okay, offset. As we put in or type in lettering, you will notice sometimes it drops in lettering below this baseline. See how my lettering looks drop down below this, like the C, this part of the E? That's because the direction that the stitches are sewing. Left to right, it's pulling in, up and down, up and down, up and down, pulling up. That's normal. You don't want to change that. By the way, this E, it looks like it's floating downhill. It's not. It's going to pull up as it stitches. Okay? So don't think that you have to go in and modify this, because you do not. But if you want to modify it, maybe I want this C to sit way up here, and I can highlight just that letter. This is my offset. Increase this value. Okay? Now, this will help you when making your own monograms, you know, when you're doing like McDonald's, you know, things like that. In high school, that in my area is called McEachern. So the C, you know, they want to move the C up, things like that. It helps you a lot when you're trying to do that. That is called your offset. Next, you have inter-character spacing. Now, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to delete this by hitting the delete key on the keyboard. I'm going to go T for text. I'm going to pick a script font. We'll just say, I don't know, how about use script condensed. Put in some lettering. Zoom in. Now, if I stitch this out, 90% of the time, you're going to be fine with that. Okay? But I know that I don't have very much overlap here or between any of these letters. I want to get a little bit of overlap because I want it to look like a script font. Now, left click in between here, decrease this option, spacing. See how I can increase or decrease it? As I decrease, see the overlap? And based on, you know, lettering combination you have, what two letters. That's why you could do them uniformly. See, I could come in here and highlight them all and just change it one time. But based on my letters, sometimes I needed 2, sometimes I needed 1, whatever. That is your inner character spacing. This is how you can go in, move things closer together or further apart. You know, you need to space out some lettering. Now I want to space this out. There we go. I can come in here and space it out. Now look, perfect example right here. I spaced it out evenly across every letter. I used the same setting. It was 2 millimeter. But because of the optical illusion of the A versus the V, it looks like there's a bigger gap right here. There's really not, but it looks like there is. So I can come in between these two and back this down. Okay? Until visually it looks better. You have that a lot of times when you're dealing with A's and W's, A's and T's, A's and V's, things like that. You'll get to where it looks like visually it's off. And you might want to go in and adjust you between just those two characters. Okay? So again, we're in text mode. We're clicking between where we want to adjust. And then we're making the adjustment. Do we want to adjust our spacing, our offset? What do we want to do? All right? Now, as we move along, this will switch between my satin fonts, which I'm doing most of the time, and my true type fonts. Okay? If I click this button, two things change. My stitch type, no longer satin, it's now a running or step. My font list. These are the fonts that you have loaded in your computer. These are the true type fonts that you have. All right? Now we're back to satin and our fonts. Now, bold, on, off. Just like bold in Microsoft Word or any other program. It's an on-off feature. I use it a lot with small lettering. If I'm doing small lettering, key to small lettering is your column width. When I say column width, I mean this distance from this line to this line. That's my column width. I don't care who you are. If you have a column width less than 1 millimeter, you're probably not going to get a good sew out. Okay? You want to know the key to good small lettering? Make sure all these columns are at least 1 millimeter or above, and they'll be fine. So when I'm doing really small lettering and I need anything that I can use to get that width up, bold is one of those options to help me with that. Okay? On off, just like that. Italic. on, off. We zoom out here, highlight it, there's italic on, there's italic off. Okay? Left, center, and right justification. Bear with me on that. We'll come back to it in just 1 second. Now, I am going to do Control A, that is select all, and delete. Go back and hit T for text. These are 4 of my tools, 4 of the 5 tools that I have to put my text on a line, on an arc, on a shape, on a circle, or there's one more too, okay, called twin arcs. If I choose line text, well, I've hit T for text, I've chosen my font, I've chosen my size. Now I come over here and choose line, my option, line text, for example. Gives me a crosshair. It tells me in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, it says enter start of baseline. I'm creating a baseline for this lettering to sit on. Left click, left click. There's my baseline. I just drew it. Now you see center justification. See it flashing there? Left justification, right justification. Okay? Those are your 3. That's where they come into play. Now, I'm going to type in my lettering. All right? At any time, I can come in here and adjust this line. I can save this design, come into it tomorrow, the next day, next year. T for text. Click in here. There's my line. Make any changes to it that I want. So that's line text. Now, one of the key things that I use line text for, and I'm going to delete this so you know I'm hitting delete, is let's say that I'm doing a bunch of names. And no matter what, I don't want my name to be wider than 3 inches. Okay? No matter what name I type in, I don't want it to be more than 3 inches. So I'm going to go T for text. I'm going to choose line text. Now, my screen is set up with 1-inch squares. So I'm going to start here. Left click. There's my 1/3 inch. Left click. Type in my name. Pick my font. Pick my size. Now, notice that I've put my name in, and guess what's happened? It's gone out past my 2 base points, and I don't want that. Double click inside here to highlight it. Text, placement. Under the text menu, the placement option is one that you'll come to use quite frequently. Text placement, condense width. Now, no matter what I type in, it's never going to be longer than those 3 inches. If this is something I do consistently, maybe I do lab coats for a doctor's office, and I always use the same hoop. I want to be consistent with my width so that every time they send me a lab coat, I'm not doing it different than the time before. I'll save this as a new design in my database. Pull it back up. They send me a new one. T for text. Highlight it. Type in my name. Now, as I type it in, if it's not long enough, it's not going to do anything to it. But as it gets longer, it will condense it down to fit what you've told it. It's not unlimited. At some point, it's going to get too thin, okay? But I would say the majority of the time, it will work the way you want it to. Great tool to have, very important. Now it goes the other way too. Not that I use this as much, but if I've got a small name, 3-inch line, text, placement, stretch, or space width. Stretch width stretches my letters to fill in that 3-inch line. Or text, placement, space my letters to fill in that line. So it can go either way. All right. Now, one more thing with the line text. T for text. Choose my line text. Create a vertical line. Okay? Left click, left click. Before I type, text, vertical, turn this on. Now type. There's your vertical text. You can still do all your controls. Like, for example, if I want to move this D up closer to the C, my spacing, okay? So all the controls I have before, I still have them. All right? Now, so that's line text. That's what you can do with line. I'm going to delete that. T for text. Next one over here, arc text. Left click, left click, left click. It requires 3 left clicks to make your arc. The left side, the right side, and the height of your arc. You'll notice also that you have 2 squares and a triangle. This triangle represents a curve. As you're getting into Ethos and as you're working with it, this is consistent with everything throughout the software. Anytime you're dealing with a curve point, it is represented by a triangle. Anytime you're dealing with a line point, it is represented by a square. Now, I haven't typed in anything yet. I'm still with a flashing cursor on my center justification. Of course, there's left, there's center, there's right. I don't like that arc. Left click and drag. Up, reversed, whatever. Okay? Now, type in my letters. Just like all my other tools, highlight, change it to a different font. Okay? Now, if I reverse this arc, look what's happened to my letters. See how they're bunched at the top? Text. Whoops, sorry. Text. Placement. Again, remember I told you you'd be using placement quite a bit? Center and below. It's defaulted for your letters to sit on the top. You can have them sit on the center of your line, or you can have them sit below your line. Okay? When you're doing a reverse arc, typically on a reverse arc, I will have them sit below my line. Just easier to deal with. All right? T for text. Next, we have supply. Left click, I'm putting in line points. Middle click, I'm putting in curve points. I drew a line that I want my lettering to follow. Notice your 2-point types. Again, line points are squares, curve points are triangles. Now I can toggle these. If I double left click a point, it changes it from what it was to the opposite. Okay? When you're using supplying text or shape text, a lot of times you'll have to go in and make your modifications, and just a slight movement can make a big difference in the spacing. I have to be perfectly honest with you, I don't use this feature too often, just because I feel like there's a lot of cleanup that we have to do to make it work well. I'm sure there's cases where you need to use it and it comes in handy, but like here, I'm going to have to come in here, figure out the best spacing for this letter, and then once I figure out this letter, I'm going to have to move to the next letter, and so on. And you always want to do it left to right, because if I change the spacing over here on the far right without changing it over here, then I might have to go back in and change it later on. So when you're doing your spacing, start this way and work your way around. Okay? Or work your way across. That is supplying text. Now, again, I'm going to do Control A, select all, I'm going to hit delete, go back up, T for text. This is my circle text. Click on circle text. Imagine I've got a little logo right here in the middle of my design, my screen. In the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, it tells me to enter the center of circle. So, I've got a design here. I've got a tiger paw, lion head, whatever. I come to the center, I left click, I drag to the right. I'm not dragging to the left, I'm not dragging up, I'm not dragging down, I'm dragging to the right. Once I've made my size, left click sets it, I'm ready to type in the top half of my lettering. Once I type, now if I continue to type, it's going to continue on around in the circle. Once I've done the top half, if I press the Enter key, it drops down to do the bottom. Alright? This is how you do circle text. Type in your top half, press the Enter key, type in your bottom half. Now, when this stitches out, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, goes down to the A, and goes around this way. Well, what if I want it to go to the F, and then down to this F, and so backwards? Save myself a little bit of time. Highlight it, text, toggle stitching direction. That just means that instead of going left to right, it's going to go right to left. Regenerate your stitches. Now look, F, F, E, D, C, B, A. Moves my exit points, does everything for me. Now, not to go too far ahead, but while we're here looking at this, something that really jumps out is the stitch between the F and the F. There's a long jump stitch there. See that? Maybe if we make it a different color, we can see it better. Alright, now you should be able to see that better. Alright, well, I want my machine to trim. How do I do a trim in Ethos? In Ethos, to add a trim, you select what you want it to trim before. Okay? You select what you want it to trim before. I want it to trim before this F. So I select the F. This is my trim command, just to the right of your needle color. I turn it on. See how it's turned on now? I regenerate my stitches. I have to do this step. Stitch all outlines. Now look at the difference. Now we have a dashed line as opposed to a solid line. As you work through the software, as we get into digitizing and other things like that, it's always the same. I've got two circles. It shows the left circle, then it shows the right circle. I want to put a trim between the two. I select what I want it to trim before. I select the right circle. I turn on my trim command. I regenerate my stitches. Boom. I'll have instead of a solid line, I'll have a dashed line. Come down here. We know that it shows the B and then the A because we told it to toggle stitching direction just a minute ago. Well, if I want to cut this line right here, I select the A. Turn on my cutter, restitch. There's my cut. Okay? Always what you wanted to trim before. The blue dashed line is different. The blue dashed line is your guidelines. Ethos has as many guidelines in there as you need. If you drag out of a ruler, you're getting a guideline. And the question was, how do you get rid of that? Well, there's two ways. First off, if I only have a couple, I can come up into the ruler and left click and drag them back out of the way. If I've got a bunch and I don't want to go through and have to drag each one out of the way, then I go to my guideline button. I say clear all and OK, and that gets rid of it. Since we're talking about guidelines, one more thing on that. X marks the spot. You need a set of guidelines in here, and I want to put them, let's say I want to put them right at the corner of this A for whatever reason. Well, I'll put my mouse there, the point of my mouse, and I'll press the X key on the keyboard. And now I've got a set of guidelines right there. Okay? X marks the spot. Come here, clear all, OK. All right. Now, there's one more tool that there's not a button for. It's called twin arcs. Again, I'm deleting what's on the screen. T for text. This time, to get to that tool, I'm going to the text menu. I'm going down to Tool. I'm going down to Twin Arcs. Left click, left click, left click. It's a combination of arc and circle. I type in the top half. I hit my enter key. I type in the bottom half. Look what's happened. My B, my F, and my L have kind of run up into my top lettering. Okay, well let's highlight the bottom half and let's condense my width. Okay? I like to use this because I'll pull this straight, and now I've got perfectly arced and straight lettering. Maybe I've got a little football logo, that I'm going to drop in between here. I can say, okay, let's drop you way down to give myself some room to put my football in there. To center the, I'm sorry, I missed your question. I'm sorry about that. To center the embroidery to print it, usually what happens is I'll go ahead and do finalize design before I go through the print process, and that way that'll center it for me, because finalize design automatically centers it. Now, if you want to manually do it, the two ways that you can manually do it, like right here, we're not really centered, and my origin's not in the center either, okay? Now, if I don't want to go through finalize design and I want to manually center this so that, again, like you said, so that I can print it, then I'm going to go here, third button, bottom toolbar. This is manual movement, okay? This is my origin. I have no idea where the center of this logo is. I know it's somewhere up in here, but I don't know where. Once I choose that option, I hold down my shift key and I left click. That automatically centers it. And then I go to views and zoom resize. So those are the two, that's the way that I manually will center this design. You can see my origin now. It's this big triangle right here. Okay? But that's the manual way. Again, if I had not done that, let's say my origin was hanging out over here, and I'm done with this design, I want to center it so that I can embroider it, print it, whatever. I can go through finalize. I can pick a fabric or not, doesn't matter. And of course, it does all the finalized steps, but it centers it and zooms resize for me. So those two manual steps that I did just a second ago, it will do that throughout the finalized design as well. So, either way. All right. So, those are my basic text tools. Now, beyond that, I have 9 deform tools. Okay? I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to take my Indians football here and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go T for text. I'm going to pick a font. And type in some lettering. I'm going to hit my right mouse button. Now, these tools that I'm about to show you are to distort your lettering. Okay? So, once I type it in and hit my right mouse button, I've got this box. Now, some basic ways to distort it before we get into these tools. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. All basic ways to distort your lettering. You can do that. Your limitation, I make this too small, probably not going to stitch out very good. Okay? Now, down here, starting right here, this is my distortion tools. Okay? All 9 of them. The first one is called box fit. That's this very first one that we see right here. It requires 1, 2, 3 left clicks. Okay? So in order for box fit to work, you put in a left side or right side in the height. Now, make sure you're clear on this. If I use these tools, I can't go back in here and highlight my lettering to change it. Before, with all those tools we've been using up to this point, I could highlight it, change it to a different font and all that. when I'm going to use these tools, I want to make sure that I've got the font that I want and I've got the spelling correct, because I can't go back in and highlight it. Okay? If it does let me highlight it for whatever reason, and I were to type something in, it would just go back to basic straight text. All right? How do you select multiple lines of text? Well, you can use your, if they're separated, I can select one, use my shift key and select the other one. Okay? But I can't highlight multiple lines. I can only highlight one line at a time. All right? Now, I'm going to delete these two. Start over. Deep for text. Type it in. Whoops. Well, that's fine. All right. Now, I've got arc text. It requires 1, 2, 3, 4 left clicks. Left side, right side, height of the arc, height of the lettering. You're controlling everything with arc text. All right? You're fitting it inside a shape typically. Undo. Distortion. Distortion gives me 4 points that I can manipulate however I want. Left click and drag. Okay? You're not going to get away with that. All right? It's not, your machine's not going to be very happy. All right? Next, you have perspective. This is your megaphone. You have 4 points to manipulate, but instead of working apart, they work together. Okay? Next, we have semi-bridge. This is my Papa John's, where I can leave one straight and arc the other, or vice versa. I can do them both if I want. Okay. Next, we have the bridge. I love the bridge tool. All right, keeps my lettering on the same plane, but puts them in an arc. It's my favorite arcing tool that we have because remember our problems we had with the A's and W's earlier, and A's and T's and A's and V's and things like that? It really helps out and makes your arc lettering very nice no matter what your lettering combination is. Okay? Arc distort. Very similar, but you'll notice that my lettering at the top is getting distorted. Globe. Okay? And cylinder. This is my roll-up. Okay? Now, so I've put some lettering in, whether it's just straight or arced or whatever I've done. I can make it whatever color I want, generate my stitches. Then I want to go through Finalize Design. If I go into Edit and Settings, this is what Finalize Design does. It centers your design. Okay, that's good. It restitches. That's always a good thing to have happen. It deletes any background image. Well, that could be on or off. That's up to you. It will warn you if your lettering is small. It won't stop you. It'll just say, hey, you might want to check this lettering. It's kind of small. it'll ask you your fabric type. If you don't know, pick default. If you've already set your stitch settings, as we get into digitizing and as you learn to set your own settings, you might turn this feature off. You can always click cancel and it will skip over that step. If you use brother equipment, you do not want jump to start. Go in and turn this off. Okay? Turn it off, it'll stay off. You don't need it with a brother machine. It'll bring up your save. Well, that's pretty good. It will delete any stitch smaller than this number. It defaults to 0.3. I typically set to 0.4. I never have to change these settings again once I change them my first time. Okay? I use my finalized design. Yes, I want to continue. It's done everything. There's my save. Okay. I'm just going to cancel instead. Centered. I'm ready now. Export my DST file. Okay. Next week, I need to make changes. I want it bigger, smaller. I'm sewing on something that I need to adjust my density. Whatever. Go into my browser. Find the design. Double click on it. Make my changes. I want to resave it. All right. You might have any questions. All right. Well, we've come to the end. I will. I'll make sure that next time we do lettering, I'll get into true types on this. Adjusting your density. Okay. Real quick. While I'm in T for text, it tells me that I'm using a satin stitch. This icon lets me adjust the density. Density and pitch mean the same thing. The higher the number, the more open the stitches are going to be. If I were sewing this word ethos on a wicking shirt, like an Under Armour type shirt, about 0.55 is good for that type of material. I've changed it. I say OK. I regenerate my stitches. It looks kind of open on the screen, right? But again, that's for that type. Now, if I'm sewing this on a beanie or a towel or something, I might want to go down to about 0.38. I never go below 0.30, okay? Now it's tighter than it was before. So that's how you adjust your stitch density. You adjust it here, you have to regenerate here for it to take effect. All right. Well, you guys have a great weekend. I appreciate you guys in the class today. Next week, probably going to be Wednesday, maybe Friday. It's going to be one of those two, but I'll let you know on Monday for sure. Yes, I will post this class. I'm trying to get them done. Hopefully, I'll have them posted by Tuesday, and they'll be up there. So, if you have any questions in the meantime, shoot me an email. I'm going to start making some little PDFs. When I send out a link to class, I'm going to attach a little PDF to it. That will probably, I'm going to try it on the next class. It might be a PDF of hotkeys or something like that. So anyway, I'm going to do that for the next one. See how it goes out. If you guys like it, then we'll continue on. If you don't, then we'll scrap it. Just a little idea I had. Otherwise, have a great weekend.